And if someone wishes within the appeal period for a transcript of that, then it will be provided by a court reporter, but it costs. And you can expect $200 to $300 an hour of cost for every hour of meeting. And for us to place that for every council meeting and for every zoning meeting, for every planning meeting, it's quite an undue burden that we pass up onto the taxpayers, because we're absorbing that by preparing those, having a person prepare those documents at that standard, while indeed we still maintain two forms of recording the meeting, both on tape and digitally. So I don't want anyone to think that there will be a loss of a record. If someone wishes to have a recording of a meeting, that's still available. If you wish to take that recording and have it transcribed, that's certainly available to you, but you shouldn't have the ability to compel the city to provide that for you and then burden the taxpayer with its cost.
I want to point out for council's edification that we are going to get new software to run this equipment. Presently, the one system is digital. The other system is on a cassette tape. The cassette tape, should a person request, if you've ever listened to it, it's very hard to distinguish who's talking and who isn't because of the channels on our system. If you would come in and pick up a new disc, you'll be able to put it right in your computer and listen to any computer you have and listen to it. So we're going to bring that into present timeline so that somebody picks up a disc. As well as we're now talking, the clerk is speaking to a man. I thought I had something, but she may not have left it, where he has a cloud designed specifically for discs and electronic capture of information. He'll place that on that cloud so that we do have that protected. So 10 years down the road, somebody wants the recording of a specific meeting, they identify it, it's returned to us, and we can give it to them as such. So it will not be keeping anybody away from any recorded minutes or any verbatim minutes.
Well, I appreciate what you're suggesting, John. I think that answers a couple of questions that I had, but I think it raises a few others. I do like the fact that in this proposal we're clarifying and requiring that we have minutes in one form, and more importantly that we're required to record, which in our current documents it doesn't even say that we're required to do so. I think it's very important that we have a verbatim recording of what happens, and I'm glad we're going to do that, and I would be against any proposal that didn't do that. That's really, really important. And like courts, they all do that too. But I guess my concern is, it's a great backdrop, but with the pace of technology as it is, one of the things I worry about is, you mentioned 10 years from now somebody pops in a disc. That is a bit of a concern, is that people talk about the age of technology being 10 years, that records that are kept in a form now are 15 years before they disappear versus a piece of paper which may be 100 years before it disappears. So I don't know that it should dissuade us from doing it, but at least that's a point that we can consider.
And that's a very valid statement, and a statement I did consider, because I mean, it was pointed out to me this morning, like, used to get floppy disks and now they're antiquated, you don't have equipment. Not to say that, 5 years down the road, this system, and we milk this system probably 7 or 8 years longer than it should be used, because it doesn't provide the service, and there's absolutely no way to service it, so it's antiquated. So.
If Doug gets hit by a bus, we're in big trouble.
We're in big trouble.
So you have that extra life insurance on.
That's a good point. Maybe in 10 years. So we have to do something about the monitor.
You guys go commercial. Don't get it. Chairperson Warren, some comments. I think one thing we should consider, if we choose to still have it somewhere stored, there needs to be a paraphrase or an interpretation for the committee meeting reports or the council reports. Right? I mean,
Yeah.
what we're saying, is that what we're saying here?
Yeah.
You know, we're not, when we come back and approve the minutes, we're not going to look at every dialogue that's happened.
We're required by law to have a paraphrase.
We're going to have somebody paraphrase or interpret all that discussion into a more defined statement process that would be recorded then for the record,
Exactly.
that we would look at and approve.
Right.
So someone will have to interpret that. I imagine is that going to be the council clerk? Is that the law director?
Councilman,
Is that Gale's role
it's
now?
actually the clerk, that's the responsibility, is prepare
Okay.
the minutes both with notes and with the recording as the aide. And when the minutes will then be provided to council members, and council does approve those, so I would recommend that when you see an area that you know that you spoke at that meeting, that you review those to make sure what's included in the minutes actually captures what your intent. And in fact, that's what the burden is for meeting records, is to provide sufficient facts to understand and appreciate the rationale behind some of council's decisions. There is not this large verbatim transcript requirement.
That's why I brought it up, because there could be some gray area.
Right, and I'm suggesting that the same thing that you have for your committee meetings, that the meetings should mention those as well, so that they show what the discussion was, how you came about to decisions, even to recommend things to place on full council.
So you're saying that the committee meetings, which we're currently going through now, there would be more of a paraphrase interpretation type of minute recording, that instead of just a one sentence.
Yes.
Sometimes, to be fair, most of our discussion happens on committee.
Right. And
A lot less discussion happens during the council meeting because we've already reviewed it. There's always the opportunity for any council member or administrative staff to weigh in. But it seems like we do our committee sessions are our work sessions, so a lot of it's laid out at that point, and differing points of view or discussion points are made more than, and sometimes not carried over into the council meeting. I'm just making everybody aware this is the change. This is what I'm going through in my mind. Is that a lot more responsibility for a clerk? Is it less responsibility versus typing, or the assistant to the clerk typing every minute out? I mean, every word of every council member or discussion point. That needs to be thought about. The second thing is too, sometimes you do lose points of interest or views that aren't always picked up with the paraphrase, because you can see how a dialogue occurs, or
what she thought, her
what she thought
interpretation.
versus what actually was said.
Right.
And there could be, when you review some minutes, it's actually very invaluable sometimes to say, well, this is how we got to that point. I don't quite remember it. We just take the minutes out and read them. I just make sure everyone's thinking this out. It's a different process, obviously. John, you've been here a long time. I have. But it's a different thought process how this is going to occur. Doesn't necessarily mean this is a bad thing to do. I'm just saying it's a change. And we all have to be ready for the change if that's the way we're going to vote this, if there's votes to do this.
To add, piggyback on top of that, one of the things that was brought to my attention was, maybe some things will be lost in translation over time. And I talked to the law director today, and we are required, a certain time frame we have to approve these minutes. We can't let these minutes lay out there for 90 days or whatever. And we typically, as our process goes, we approve them the following meeting. So you have time to review that paraphrased version. And if something in there doesn't seem right to you, you have, the ability to make that known within a 7-day frame, basically. So you're not stretching it out over a long period of time, is what I'm saying.
And remember that your meeting minutes simply kind of give a summary for those that weren't there or wish to recall that, generally what was covered to provide council with the information to make its decisions. If you wish to get much more comprehensive and into the details of the back and forth emotions that were involved, pauses, things of that nature, tape's always available to you. We're not destroying the tape. The tape is available. If you wish for an important issue to have it transcribed, ask to have it transcribed. And importantly, if there's one important issue, last meeting, I believe we had 16 pieces of legislation. Let's say 2 were the critical ones. Perhaps there was. I mean, that one. He asked for a transcript. The clerk will simply prepare a transcript for that. We'll certify it, place it in the record. And with that, then it becomes a public record. If a resident wishes to have a copy of that, we can provide a copy for that, just as we can with the minutes. And if they wish to have another meeting, that's available to them as well. They can listen to it, or they can have it transcribed if they wish. But for that reason that they wish, we've had people come in and say, that's my hobby. I like to read your minutes. Well, that's all good and well, but you shouldn't burden the taxpayers to pay for that hobby at several $100s for every meeting. When we listen to it, it's a couple dollars for a recording. We have our minutes that are available, but if you want a verbatim transcript, it's expensive. You pay the equivalent of a court reporter to listen to that, to certify every single word. If you stumble, if you stutter, in a verbatim transcript, it's every single word. And that's expensive.
Do we know what the cost is? I mean, what the real cost is of having a verbatim transcript?
I don't know how many hours it takes
Well,
them
you
to
have
put together.
a part-time clerk, it's about $26,000.
So is it fair to say, I'm truly...
That's her job, right?
That's her sole purpose of her job.
So if we eliminated the requirement of a verbatim transcript, we would be saving $26,000.
Well, let me explain something. You know, except for when she's on vacation. the woman's-
I want to ask the question clearly, right?
Yeah, I don't want to make a statement that's not. She's here covering. She would be still doing minutes, but she's also here to answer the phone when Gail's on vacation.
Right,
But her
right.
99% of her job is to transcribe those minutes. A few years back, we looked at the fact we had a full-time assistant clerk doing the same thing, which with benefits was $59,000 some dollars, and it was ludicrous. So we eliminated that position, and Gail lobbied then for an assistant to do the minutes. I believe she's here about 3 days a week. We hire her through an agency, so we pay an hourly rate. She's not a captive employee.
You go ahead.
It was mentioned earlier that the courts use this exact same.
No, they don't use this standard. This is more than they
The
use.
proposed standard, is that what you're saying?
What we're proposing is what the courts use.
Right. The verbatim is not,
Yes, so
right.
what the court uses, that the court will record, but it doesn't provide it unless you pay for that cost. It's there for a period of time up until the appeals period elapses. But if you wish to have a verbatim transcript, because it's expensive, then you'll pay for the cost for that transcript.
It is important to note that in that case, though, they've got the convenience of being eliminated after a relatively short window
Right.
versus us, where
Right.
we want to hold on to those records for a substantially longer period of time than several months.
The
But why are you
minutes,
saying we wouldn't be able to?
I'm not suggesting that we wouldn't. I'm saying that there would be a cost associated with that too. I was trying to figure out, I was trying to run the numbers. So if we're saying we could save $26,000, but we've got to net from that the cost of dealing with the technology appropriate with holding on to these for a longer period of time. That's all. That's what I was
Okay.
That's what I'm trying to say.
Well, you also factor in the cost of taking your assets, Gail, Bev, and putting them on different projects, other projects.
Tim said there's plenty for them to do. You know, it's
Well-
not even a matter of eliminating a position. There's just different ways to allocate their time.
Yeah.
And like for me,
Can you put a cost on that? You
Right.
can say-
You're right.
right, and for me, when I think of different ways that I'm given minutes from different board meetings or committees, it is not obviously in the verbatim format. It's in the, this is what we discussed, maybe it says who's discussed it, but for all of us who read these days, I mean, everything is short to the point, but it does make you pay attention to it a little bit. I mean, to go through those minutes, it's timely. And there seems like sometimes there's people's jokes or there's just things that maybe aren't as important. And if it's more concise, none of us have any problem calling each other. So if there was any issue, it's not difficult from that transcript to say, you know, I'm just going to pick up the phone. I don't maybe need the detailed interaction at that moment to say whether or not I'm going to call someone. So for me, the shortness was probably helpful.
At some point, you're going to look at, you have the minutes to say in perpetuity.
Yeah.
That the recordings, even if we maintain the standard of technology and so forth, at some point, as time goes by, the exact statements that were given become perhaps less and less important. I don't know how often someone said, I've got to have the January 15th, 1967 council meeting minutes in verbatim form. I have to know. I don't imagine that happens that often. But what happens often is every meeting right now is these are transcribed. And if you had a court reporter sitting in here doing this and you're asking, what does that cost the city to have that? And we indicated it, or you could have the regular minutes would summarize this. They may say, why is that so important? Because some people would like to hear what was going on at that point. I get it, I understand, but are they willing to share the burden and the cost? Because we just stripped it evenly over everything. It doesn't matter who requests them, how often, everyone pays the cost for that reporting.
You had a question?
Just to follow up, there needs to be, is Gail more involved because it's a paraphrase versus somebody typing word by word? That is going to be, I feel, something that needs to be addressed in the office.
She, to share with her, with all of her statement to me, she preferred to paraphrase the council of the whole minutes. Right now, as you say, it's a one-liner, it really doesn't mean a lot.
Right.
And she encourages that. She's not opposed, she said to me, even as late as 4 o'clock, it doesn't make a difference to her. It's not going to make a significant difference to her that she keeps the minutes verbatim or the other way. She did not comment it was easier. She didn't want it to be weighing in. But as far as the council of the whole, she preferred to paraphrase them. She says because right now they're just a one-liner that we write on a piece of paper.
Well, it's our committee reporters.
Right, and she says that, many times she'll call and she'll say to me what happened so she can elaborate a little more. Because she feels that, with the new recording equipment, she'll get much better detail and be able to paraphrase much better council of the whole.
I guess that was my point too. Hopefully Gail's been part of the process here. This is a change. This isn't something
She has been included.
we take for granted here that,
No.
She indicated that she's done both methods, both regular minutes and both.
it affects her job more than anybody's running.
If you think that
Yeah, the burden comes to her ultimately to do the work.
Dan and I can get in discussions and it's 15 minutes and what it boils down to is that we agreed with Councilman Peters and Foltz. We took 15 minutes to get across. She could say,
Healthy debate.
they agreed.
Right.
They were in concurrence.
I was just going to say, it worries me that some of those discussions have lasted.
Well, one of the things that I look at, and Dan, when we were talking about the saving to council, you factor in the planning and the zoning board of appeals, and then you have
You have a paid person.
a non-exempt personnel
Right.
that's paying time and a half
Right.
a lot of times to transcribe for planning.
In fact,
So who goes to this?
It's done through engineering and permits and inspection.
Okay.
right, and it's members of the bargaining unit that are here at time and a half that are doing that. And in fact, at the last appeals hearing that I was at, when the clerk had prepared those minutes, specifically the chair of the appeals board had contacted Eric Bowles and myself and stated that he wanted to know why there were verbatim minutes when indeed the necessity is only prepare regular meeting minutes, and asked that I look into this specifically for that committee and to bring them back to simply regular type of minutes, not a verbatim transcript. It's too much of a burden
So
to place on that
it'd be
person.
copied, and then Gail would then be responsible for also
No,
Okay.
we have an individual for each one of those.
That would be
Those
responsible.
boards that are responsible.
Okay.
And that's important to know, because that's the decision we're making, is what's
What do
the
you-
financial baseline for everything, not just council, but for planning and zoning.
Right.
And you're always going to have that unit that's going to have everything, word
Right.
for word, you can fall
Each
back
one
on.
uses the same
Yeah,
format.
it's just the day-to-day transcribing of that and the money we're going to save across the board.
Well, prior to the Sonic coming under scrutiny by the Plan Commission, Council, the ZBA, the zoning board, and planning never kept those types of records. And then President Revolt was upset that he didn't have the history of the brick at Washington Square. If you recall, he thought the brick should match at Sonic, and he swore it was in the record.
But
Whether or
wouldn't
not.
you still have had the tape recording?
Well, yeah, but he wanted them to actually in paper form. So the council passed an ordinance requiring planning and zoning board of appeals to keep verbatim minutes. So that forced them, that was maybe about 6 years ago, 7 years, I forget how long ago. Remember that, Doug?
Yes.
He was livid because, and so we did pass an ordinance, because normally they fall under the Tourism Administration and under the Department of Engineering or permits.
What other jurisdictions do? Do we have the answer to that?
Excuse me?
What
Or
is the
record.
standard by other, I mean, for other...
Oh, you mean other cities,
Right.
municipalities?
Right.
I'm not sure.
Gail tells me the majority of them do not keep verbatim minutes.
I mean, that's been
Karen,
my
you don't think
experience.
It's too expensive.
Yeah.
It's a variety. You don't see verbatim unless there's a problem.
But almost every jurisdiction records, even though that's...
Yeah.
not handed.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so they have some form of electronic capture.
It serves as a backup for, if there's a challenge, that's the purpose of having the recording. You say, I didn't say that, or that wasn't my position, it was mischaracterized. And you have the opportunity to review the minutes when you see them. If you don't approve it, state that. If they disagree, play it, you listen to it. And that's the point, to have that recording backup, that if you thought you heard otherwise, you can go back to that. You can ask for if you wish, a transcript of that portion of the proceeding. That would be much less expensive than this rote process of verbatim transcript for every single